Another episode of Hidden Conversations. This afternoon, I am joined from Brazil by a very good friend of mine and someone I have the most amount of respect for, Geoff Newton. Geoff, welcome.
Thank you, Dave. Really appreciate your welcome.
I am really glad that we are able to connect, especially at the moment. We've known each other now kind of quite a while, and I understand more about the topic today from you than I've learned from anyone else in my career. So, ladies and gentlemen, this afternoon, Geoff and I are just going to touch on a topic that is very rarely spoken about within the therapeutic arena, and that's addictions within therapy. And Geoff, it's probably worth letting people have a bit of a glimpse at your background and your knowledge on the subject before we get started.
Okay, I've had a personal interest in addiction since probably the early 80s. As a young guy, I struggled with addiction. So I'm one of the people that are susceptible to addiction. I think some of us are. Neuroscience is telling us some of the reasons why that I think we always knew, but it's kind of putting it into a different context now. You know, it's a chemical deficiency more often than not, arguably initiated by trauma, maybe nurture nature as well, we're not sure, but certainly by trauma seems to be one of the underlying factors. And then we've got oversensitivity, or hypersensitivity, which seems to be another contributing factor. And then what I've noticed recently is more often than not, and this is how I like to empower my clients, is that they tend to, this is a generalization, but I think we need to generalize to get an idea, as I certainly do, because I'm changing the way I work and one day hope to change the way we work. I think what we need to do is recognize the commonalities, even if they're generalizing. But I think it's really important. I've started to notice, I think I've always noticed, but I'm noticing more, people with addictive or dependency-led habitual traits are more often than not, they find it very difficult to put themselves first. Very difficult. I mean, it's the part of the work is empowering someone, and I get kickbacks like selfish. I had to think of myself, and I wonder where all this comes from. And if you start to put yourself first, you start to empower yourself. You start to raise your self-esteem. It's the other thing, low self-esteem, of course. I mean, that's a given. But how do you get self-esteem raised if you put everyone before you, or most people before you?
Yeah.
It's very difficult. You're depleting your self-esteem.
Yeah.
So this is, there's things I'm noticing.
One of the things that kind of I've noticed is that, and as someone that also has that kind of connective personality, if you like, once I get a rush of adrenaline, I want to keep hold of that adrenaline. I want to keep going. Is the sense of and the connectivity with imposter syndrome, and this sense of not putting yourself first, not your self-worth, everything else. Once imposter syndrome takes hold, it's almost like it's another doorway to add to that list of factors that you mentioned.
That's a very good point. Yeah, I mean, I hear that more. I've been very fortunate to work right across the board almost. I worked with children, and I became an empath practitioner, which is moving parents and children together within addiction. So I've had that experience, children, families, and somebody or more than one person that's suffering from addiction within the system. Mm-hmm. And then I've worked with homeless people off the street in a clinic in London and a rehab, wet house. I've had all of this lovely experience. And working now in Brazil, my clients are more high-end clients with some kind of affluent with really high-end jobs. And I hear this, imposter syndrome. I feel like I'm sort of acting the part. And, you know, and that's quite interesting, isn't it? If I feel like I'm acting the part, then what is it do you feel? And what is the gap between the two? You know, where is that gap? We all wing it sometimes. You get up in a bad day and think, oh, you know, we need to wing it, and that's okay. But, you know, that's an interesting concept, isn't it? Where's the gap? What does it look like? Where do you feel you are to where you are imposting?
Yeah.
Or imposing it or whatever. You know, that's
and when we
nice work.
And when we see how addictive substances work their way into that coping strategy for whatever the doorway was, the bridge from that doorway that can be any form of kind of dependency. It doesn't have to be substance. It can be, as you know, it could be alcohol, it could be all sorts of things.
And alcohol's been doing this for centuries, you know, and beyond that. I remember a colleague saying to me once, he went for voluntary work as a trainee psychotherapist many, many years ago. I won't say where it was because I wouldn't want anybody to guess the place. But what I would say, it was a place in London. He went for voluntary work. He went for an interview and he smelled alcohol off the person's breath. I mean, this was like probably about 28 years ago. But so, you know, it's always, we've always, and this is a therapist, and this is what we're getting into. If we are positioned towards using substances, you know, let's just say alcohol in this instance, to top up our dopamine, endorphins, serotonin, if we use that as a coping mechanism, then we get caught up in that. When we stop, they crash. So how do we build them back up? So what we get caught up in the system, in the cycle. You know, I can't build up my serotonins, dopamines, and endorphins naturally because it's almost like your mind has got used to waiting for the substance of choice to come in.
Yeah, and it's almost like you know, I kind of fall back on the kind of two wolf analogy of, you know, you've got the good wolf and the bad wolf, and the good wolf is those endorphins and everything else that you can look after naturally, everything else, and the bad wolf that is the gremlin of addiction, of substance, of.
And that's where, you know, that's where the addictive part and the saboteur and the tempter and all of that live in that side. You know, that's kind of its chosen home, if you like. That's where it likes to live.
And what we see within the therapy arena, and you know, and in high professional arenas, let's take it out of therapy for a second, but in high stress professional arenas where that imposter syndrome, that dependency, all of those things are high factors of success. That dependency can live unchallenged. And
I mean, I used to work in the film industry. That's a, you know, I hear that it's cleaned up its act since I was there considerably. But, you know, that's a typical example. You know, some of the most famous actors on the planet, I won't name them, but, you know, you can guess some of them, have had terrible addiction issues with cocaine and alcohol because money isn't an issue, of course.
Yeah.
And again, we get caught up in the cycle. And actually, you know, when you're working the kind of hours we used to work, you have no social life.
Yeah.
So it kind of works. And that, you can take that away from that into banking.
Yeah.
Financing. You know, long hours, lots of money, high pressure, come out of work, it all crashes because it's been really exciting and the adrenaline buzz, like we're setting up the camera rig, like 30 foot up in the air for Harry Potter model, and we're doing all this stuff, it's all go, 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 and you crash, everything crashes. You know, you want to put that back up.
Yeah.
And you know, the people that don't understand this, the people who don't understand this don't have the chemical deficiency. Because I hear a lot of my colleagues go, no, that's nonsense. I don't believe that. Well, you won't believe it if you don't know it.
Yeah.
And you won't know it unless it happens to you. You know what it's like to crash lower than everybody else.
Yeah.
To a point where it's desperate. and depressing,
Yeah.
and it's bleak, and it's dark, and it's anxious, and it's all of these things. If you don't know what that feels like, you're not going to get it.
Yeah.
Not really. You could use empathy, and we could try, but believe me, when that crashes, and they also say that when you crash, the caretakers are very slow, and we've got less of them, so they don't get rid of it, ready to rebuild it. So it's kind of like hanging around in this lully place, in this dark place. You know, you're not going to get it. And my colleagues, our colleagues, the therapists that use crutches, alcohol, maybe a few drinks at the end of the day, you know, some maybe use weed or maybe other stuff, who knows. But they will get it. They will get what we're talking about. The others that really turn away from this and don't understand it, they just won't get it, I'm sure. But, or maybe some will. But like I say, unless, you know, one thing we say in the drug world, if you've been there, you become a better drug worker. It's not an absolute, because there's always somebody going to break the mold. I've met some wonderful workers, I mean, outstanding, that haven't. But usually they've had somebody very close.
Yeah. And it's that connectivity. It's that connectivity to the reality of the situation and the environment and the experience that's lived that carries a huge amount of weight. I can remember when I was getting into performance work many years ago, being warned by my manager that post-performance blues is a doorway to the dark side. And I didn't know what that meant until I came off stage one day and I saw post-performance blues hit. And it is frightening to watch somebody crash that way. And it's something that as public speakers, we get that rush of the audience feedback, everything else. But this year, that hasn't been in play. That ability to stand in front of an audience and present and train and share information just has not existed in the same way. So I've personally seen more and more therapeutic professionals at the end of the day posting selfies, making posts, should I say, that is clearly showing that they've got to the end of the day, glass of wine, bottle of beer, and, you know, 2 or 3 glasses, almost.
You know, Dave,
it's a norm.
And I think there's a natural, I'll have to talk about me now, but I feel, even with my past and all my understanding, there's a natural swing towards the negative, almost like, oh, we shouldn't be doing that. We're professionals, we're therapists. But actually, that comes from somewhere. I'm not sure where that comes from, but it's not really relevant. Actually, when I sit down and think about this logically and take away, you know, that kind of defensive reaction almost that swings towards, oh, we shouldn't do that. Why shouldn't we? Why shouldn't we, as professionals, working extremely hard in such difficult circumstances, find some solace in a glass or 2 of wine or a few beers? Why shouldn't we? Now, that's a question for us all to answer individually. It's not for me, you know, for us to answer it. But, you know, and is there anything wrong with that or not?
And that's that question between a functioning dependency that is beneficial and supports the positive engagement, and a negative dependency that actually has connotations outside of that moment of let's just have the glass of wine.
I'd go one step further as well. I would actually say, you know, you just reiterated what I would have said maybe a few years ago, but now during this pandemic, and you know, it's been the year of all years, isn't it? We discussed it before it came online. It's been, you know, it's going to go down in the history books. You know, people are going to write about it. I don't know. I think one of the phrases "silent war" or something, but it's got connotations or something like that. I've changed actually this year. I've changed the way I think. You know, if we're aware enough and we say to ourselves, do you know what? I've had a week of all weeks and I'm going to have a couple of beers or a couple of glasses of wine or a few glasses of wine just to forget this week, to step off this world and give myself a break from this place because this is too much. Question again, is that okay or is it not? You know, I think for me, what is okay is if I know what's going on and I am not kidding myself. I think that's the difference. That for me is where the empowerment is.
Yeah.
If I know and I'm boundaried and I say, Friday evening, I'm going to go and have a few beers because I've had a week of all weeks, my head is pounding, I can't sleep because I've got all of these clients going through my mind. The different, stories and life stories, tragedies and everything. And I'm going to have a few beers to forget this for a few hours. Is that okay?
And I think you answered the question I was just going to put to you. And you do this to me all the time, my friend. And I love the fact that you...
I thought you had finished, actually. I really did. You kind of took a breath and I thought,
here he goes. Yeah. But it is that self-awareness at that moment, isn't it? That this is why I'm doing it and I'm doing it for now. For me, I think the challenge is, especially this year, where that tough week has become tough months. And the coping strategy, when it's a week, okay. When it's becoming daily, are we risking our own capacity in the functionality that we have on a day-to-day basis?
Good question.
And I think the biggest or one of the earliest victims of any kind of dependency is self-awareness. We stop being aware of why we need to do that, and it just becomes that's what we do.
Well, substances do take away our awareness. There's no doubt about that. I think that's, we start, you started off by saying that the dark and white wall. Now, if you feed the darker side, that becomes bigger and you start, the wider side depletes. We have many things going on in the mind, facets, sides, egos, if you want to go transactional analysis, PAC or CAP, whichever way you want to do it. We've got a lot going on. And one thing I've learned is the ones that we feed the most grow the most, but they turn the volume down on the other ones.
Yeah.
And it's natural. So then if we keep doing something so let's go back to the analogy of having a drink on a Friday just to get off the world for a few hours. Now that's one thing. You start doing it every day, that side of us starts to grow and it's almost like feeds denial. And that's the opposite for me for awareness. Denial and awareness are opposing paths. So what the alcohol or the substance does, it starts to inflate the denial, and the voice goes down on your awareness.
Yeah.
And then that can be a slippery slope.
Yeah.
I think we said before, autonomy without boundaries is a dangerous thing. Like anybody who's brought up children will know that you've got your boundaries, but you want to give them autonomy. Like Bowlby talks about this, and getting that balance. I mean, it's not impossible, isn't it? We'll do our best, but that is so important. So, how do I kind of autonomously say to myself, I'm going to use that for a few hours to get off and give myself a little bonus, if you want, or whatever you say. But how do you kind of keep your boundaries in place that you don't allow that to creep in too often as a coping mechanism?
Yeah. And I think in a large part, as a professional organisation, as a professional group of people, the safest kind of boundary is really ourselves as a group of people. And
awareness.
Yeah. And by keep flagging up those conversations and the fact that this year, probably for the first time, it's really noticeable, the conversation's gone quiet. And I think there is an argument that the denial has gone up because of what people are doing to cope behind closed doors. And the awareness has gone down. And because the awareness has gone down, the conversation, like you say, the volume has gone down on that awareness. And part of the reason, yeah, and part of the reason why in this really short hidden conversation, because I know we're not going to go into this in any great detail, but just flag it up so hopefully the conversation can carry on offline. And
I would just like to say one other thing as well, though, that I've noticed. I mean, obviously my circumstances are very different, but I'm sure there's other colleagues that can relate. I very sadly went through a divorce with a partner that I love very much, but we just weren't compatible in January. Then we were locked down in March. And one of my coping mechanisms through my life to cope with my addictive personality was to train. Because look, the best way for me to get my endorphins, serotonins, and dopamines up and keep them up there naturally is to train.
And adrenaline is what those dopamines are there to receive.
Right. So, I was a martial artist. I became a martial art instructor. I've done judo, I've done taekwondo, I've done some different things. I train in the gym, do a bit of running on the street. I've got little legs, so I'm not a great runner like yourself, but I do my best. Now that has been taken away from us. I think this is a really important point. One of our crutches, my crutches, and I know many others, I've been to the gym twice this week. I've tried to get in more, but work, and you've got to WhatsApp the gym and get a spot if you can, and everybody wants to get a spot. It's quite a big gym. We're only allowed 10 in there. So, we've got to look at this. Not only have we had the worst year that a lot of us have ever experienced, not any of us haven't seen wars or anything or any real hardship. Our coping mechanisms are being dismantled. Socializing for many, like I live on my own now, has been limited. Being connected to others is limited through Zoom. And I work on Zoom. I live where I work, or I work where I live. God only knows which way you want to put it. But all of these things, and my socializing in the gym has been kind of dismantled. And what do we have? What do I know? Is alcohol, right? So it's going to creep back in. Of course, you're going to look for what you know.
Yeah,
we are going to look for what we know, and the strategies that were put in place to help us have been dismantled by the pandemic.
Yeah.
So the reason I'm saying is I don't want anybody I don't want to feel shame about having a drink to cope, and I wouldn't want any of my colleagues to do. Many of us are doing it.
Yeah.
What I want to try and just recognize what is happening to us, and ask the question: Am what I'm doing okay for me and my clients, of course?
Yeah. And I think that is a brilliant point to kick off the conversation moving this forward, is that sense of what I'm doing, my awareness of what I'm doing at this moment for this moment, and not for what was yesterday, the day before, or anything else. What I'm doing for now. Geoff, I want to say thank you so much for your time. I know you've got clients in a few minutes, so I'm going to put it there. But
just one other thing I would just like to add, that a lot of therapists are self-critical. Be kind, really be kind to ourselves. I really believe a lot of us, if not all of us, are really unsung heroes. We are picking up the pieces, and the post-traumatic stress is starting to come through as the light of the vaccine shines through on the future looking a bit better. Also, the cracks are appearing inside of us and many of the public, our clients. Be kind. When we're critically looking at ourselves, or critiquingly is as kind a word, if you find you're doing something to cope, be kind to yourself.
Yeah, you're coping really for a reason.
Absolutely, and that's absolutely.
And there is really where I think both of us come from. I know it's where APA comes in at. It's a case of, if there is a reason why you are needing to cope, then let's look at those as well. Don't just look at what the coping strategy is. Look at the reason why you're needing a coping strategy.
That's kindness, yeah.
And that gives you that kindness. But as peers, be kind to each other.
Yeah.
We are
empathically. We know how to be empathic, right? We're empathic. We're empaths.
This is where I think holding on to the fact that as peers, we are the best team of people to support each other.
Only if we empathically are kind to ourselves, you will find the kindness going on to others, and vice versa.
Exactly.
It's interesting, isn't it? How we find it so easy to be empathic to others, and yet we give ourselves a hard time.
Yeah.
And it's just turning it outward, inward. If I can be empathic towards you, Dave, in your struggle, I can do it with me.
Yeah. And that is key. So everyone watching, I hope you have had an informative half hour or so with Geoff and I. The video will always hold out on the YouTube channel. Go check it in, dip in. But let's drive this conversation. Let's start looking at how we can support each other as professionals right across the board, whatever the coping strategy might be. Guys, reach out in empathy to each other and accept
Great message.
So, Geoff, thank you very much.
Thank you always, Dave, for the opportunity. And anybody who listens, thank you for listening. And my hope is that we will all get something from this. I certainly do, but we all will. And you know, like Dave said, there's self-empathy and kindness, because we've had it tough this year. We really have.
We really have.
Yeah,
so guys,
everybody, take care.
Hope to see you on another episode. For now, take care.
Do take care, everybody. Bye-bye.